The afternoon was calm in the little suburban town, where children usually played on their bicycles and neighbors often waved to one another from their porches. But in the last few days, something unusual had been sitting quietly at the edge of the neighborhood. It was an old, dusty car, parked near the line of trees where the streetlight barely touched. At first, people thought it belonged to someone visiting, or maybe a broken car waiting to be towed. But as days passed, no one came near it. The car remained still, covered in dirt and leaves, and it began to make the neighbors uneasy. Some of the children whispered stories about it. They said maybe the car was haunted, or maybe someone left it behind after doing something bad. Parents told them not to go near it, but curiosity kept pulling eyes toward the vehicle. Finally, one evening, an older woman who often walked her dog stopped in front of the car and noticed something odd. She said the smell was strange, faint but sharp, as if something inside had been forgotten for too long. She frowned, pulled out her phone, and called the police. Officer Daniels was on duty that evening. He was known as a calm and dependable officer, and he always worked with his loyal police dog, Rex. The big German shepherd had been trained for years, and everyone in the department respected him. Together they had solved cases that seemed impossible, finding missing people, drugs, or even stolen property. When the call came in about the abandoned car, Daniels thought it might be nothing serious. But he took Rex with him, because the dog's nose was sharper than any human eye. When the patrol car pulled up, a few neighbors were already standing at a distance, waiting and watching. Officer Daniels stepped out, adjusting his uniform cap, and Rex jumped down beside him, tail wagging but ears alert. The old car was in front of them, silent as if it had been forgotten by time. Its paint was dull, the windows covered in dust, and weeds had started to grow around its tires. Daniels first walked around the car carefully. He noted that the license plate was missing. That was unusual. He peeked inside the windows, but the dust made it hard to see. From the corner of his eye, he noticed Rex growing tense. The dog's ears pricked, his nose lifted, and then he began circling the vehicle slowly. "Easy, boy," Daniels murmured, though he knew Rex well enough to understand that this wasn't ordinary curiosity. Rex sniffed along the sides, paused at the rear, then suddenly let out a sharp bark. The sound was loud in the quiet evening. The neighbors jumped a little. Daniels frowned and moved closer. Rex barked again, his paws scratching against the back of the car. He was fixated on the trunk, his body stiff, his eyes locked on it as if it were alive. Daniels tapped the trunk lightly with his knuckles, trying to listen for hollow sounds. He expected maybe a raccoon or stray animal trapped inside, something that could explain the smell. But Rex's bark was different this time. It was urgent, commanding, the way he barked during dangerous operations. The officer crouched down, sniffing the air carefully. The smell was faint, yes, but it wasn't like spoiled food. It was heavier, sharper, something that made him uneasy. He stood up and looked at the gathering neighbors. "Step back, please," he told them gently. They obeyed, moving farther onto the sidewalk, whispering among themselves. Rex continued barking, pawing at the trunk, refusing to leave it alone. Daniels tugged gently at the handle, but of course it was locked. He stepped back, rubbing his chin. This was no longer just a casual check. He reached for his radio and called for backup. Unit 7 requesting assistance, his voice crackled through. Possible abandoned vehicle, suspicious circumstances. Dog is alerting strongly at the trunk. Need second unit. The reply came quickly, and Daniels knew help would be there in minutes. But those minutes stretched long as Rex barked and barked, his body refusing to relax. A few more neighbors came out of their homes, drawn by the noise. Some children tried to peek around their parents, wide-eyed, but were pulled back. Everyone could feel something unusual was happening. Daniels knelt beside Rex, placing a hand on the dog's back. "What is it, buddy?" he whispered. Rex let out a low growl, then another sharp bark. The sound echoed against the houses. Daniel's stomach tightened. He had been on the force for over 10 years, and he trusted Rex's instincts more than anything. The dog had never been wrong before. Soon another police car arrived, lights flashing softly. 2 officers stepped out, one holding a flashlight. They greeted Daniels, and he explained quickly what was happening. They too circled the car, inspecting every side, noting the missing plate and dusty windows. One of them leaned in closer, then stepped back, shaking his head slightly at the smell. "What do you think?" the officer asked Daniels. "I think we shouldn't take chances," Daniels replied. "Rex is sure of it." The second officer tried to pull Rex away so they could tow the car to the station, But the dog resisted, planting his paws firmly on the ground, barking louder now. His eyes never left the trunk. It was as if he knew that moving the car without checking could mean losing something important. The officer gave up, stepping back. By now the neighbors were restless. A few of them started whispering theories. Maybe stolen goods, maybe something illegal, maybe worse. The crowd grew thicker as more people came out of their houses, and the street that was usually calm felt heavy with suspense. Daniels called again for authorization. "We need to open the trunk," he said firmly. "Dog is making continuous alerts. Could be urgent." The wait for confirmation seemed endless, though it was only a matter of minutes. Rex's barking became almost desperate, as though he was trying to tell them time was running out. Daniels paced in front of the car, glancing at the trunk every few seconds, feeling the pressure build. When the confirmation finally came through, Daniels nodded, relief mixing with tension. He turned to the other officers and said, "All right, we're opening it." The crowd held their breath. Even the children fell silent. The quiet night was broken only by Rex's barking and the chirp of crickets in the grass. Daniel stepped closer to the trunk with his flashlight, his heart beating faster than usual. He had opened many cars before, searched many places, but this one felt different. Rex quieted for just a moment, watching intently, as if waiting too. The dog's chest rose and fell, his body trembling with energy. The officers prepared their tools to pry the trunk open. But before they even touched it, the heavy feeling in the air told everyone that something inside would change the night forever. The quiet street was no longer quiet. More neighbors had stepped out of their homes, some holding their phones, some folding their arms tightly, and some whispering in low voices. The abandoned car, once ignored, had now become the center of everyone's attention. The flashing lights from the police vehicles cast a strange glow across the houses, and Rex's sharp barking echoed again and again. It was as though the entire neighborhood held its breath, waiting for something to happen. Officer Daniels stood close to the trunk, his flashlight in one hand and his other hand resting near his belt. He knew the smell was faint but troubling, and he knew Rex's instincts were never wrong. The dog stood firmly by the trunk, refusing to leave, his body pressed forward, ears raised, eyes fixed. It was not a game, not a false alert. This was something serious. Backup officers moved carefully around the car, checking under it with their lights, looking inside through the dusty glass and examining the doors. The car was locked tight. The windows, though dirty, showed nothing except old seats and shadows. One officer pulled on the handle of the driver's side door, but it didn't move. Another officer shone his light through the back window and shrugged. Nothing unusual could be seen still, Rex barked. His barks were no longer random. They came in bursts, sharp and demanding, then followed by low growls as if he was speaking in his own language, telling them all, "Do not ignore this." The neighbors were growing restless. A tall man from across the street stepped closer and called out, "What's in there, officer? Why's the dog going crazy?" Daniels lifted a hand to calm him. "We don't know yet, sir. Please stay back. For your safety." The man nodded but didn't look convinced. Parents held their children's shoulders, pulling them behind, though many little eyes peeked curiously from between arms. A young woman whispered, "It feels like something alive is inside." Another replied, "What if it's dangerous?" The crowd's nervous whispers only added to the heavy air. Daniel spoke into his radio again. "We'll need clearance to open the trunk here. It's not safe to move the car. K9 is refusing to leave the trunk." The voice on the other side gave him the go-ahead, but reminded him to proceed with caution. Daniels turned to his fellow officers. "We open it here, no choice. But carefully. Stay alert," Rex barked again as though he understood. His tail stiffened, his nose pressed against the metal, and he scratched at it with his paw. Daniels bent down and stroked the dog's head. "Good boy. We hear you," he whispered. Two officers brought out a tool to break the lock. The metallic sound of metal hitting metal made everyone flinch. The trunk didn't open right away. It resisted as if it was holding on to its secret. They worked together, pushing and pulling, while Daniels kept his flashlight steady. The smell grew stronger, floating into the night air. A few neighbors covered their noses. One of the children whispered, "What is that smell?" But no one answered. Still, the trunk wouldn't budge. Rex barked louder, moving side to side, his eyes never leaving the spot. Daniels could feel the tension in his chest growing heavier with every second. His mind raced with possibilities. He thought of stolen goods, maybe illegal items hidden away, maybe something worse. His experience told him that whatever was inside was not simple. Finally, with one last pull, the lock creaked and bent. The trunk moved slightly but didn't open completely. The officers exchanged quick glances, their faces pale under the flashlight beams. One of them muttered, "This doesn't feel right." Daniels nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "On 3, he said firmly. 1, 2, 3. They lifted the trunk lid just an inch, enough for the smell to rush out. Everyone nearby recoiled. Gasps filled the air. Daniels forced himself to stay steady, shining the light inside through the narrow gap. The beam of the flashlight cut through the dark space, revealing something wrapped in blankets. The bundle was large, lying still. At first glance, it looked lifeless. The officers froze, their hearts pounding. Daniels swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment. The neighbors, though far back, sensed the tension and fell completely silent. The entire street seemed to stop moving, waiting. "Open it all the way," Daniels whispered. The officers pulled the lid higher. The blankets filled the trunk space, dirty and old, tied loosely at the edges. The smell was stronger now, unpleasant, making it hard to breathe. Daniels moved the light closer. His stomach twisted. He expected the worst, prepared for it in his mind. Then it happened. The blanket shifted. It was small at first, just the faintest movement, almost like a trick of the eye. Daniels blinked. He thought his mind was playing games with him. But then the blanket shifted again, more clearly this time. Something inside was alive. Rex stopped barking and tilted his head, whining softly. He lowered his body as though ready to protect or comfort. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. "Wait, did you see that?" one officer whispered sharply. "Yes," Daniel said, his voice low but steady. "Something's in there." The officers carefully reached in, pulling the blanket back. What they saw made their eyes widen. Inside the dirty fabric was a child, a little girl no older than 6. Her face was pale, her hair tangled, her clothes wrinkled and dusty. She blinked against the light, her small hands trembling. Gasps erupted from the crowd. A woman cried out, covering her mouth with her hand. Even the toughest of the officers froze for a second, shocked at what they were seeing. Daniel stepped forward quickly, his instincts taking over. He gently lifted the girl into his arms, feeling how weak and light she was. The girl clung to him, too exhausted to cry, her eyes wide with fear. She whispered something, but her voice was too soft to hear clearly. Daniels bent his head closer. "It's okay. You're safe now," he said softly. Rex stood tall beside them, tail wagging slowly, his eyes calm now. The dog seemed to know he had been right, that his stubborn barking had saved a life. The neighbors could not believe what they were seeing. The little girl had been hidden inside that car trunk, and without Rex, she might have been forgotten there. People shook their heads, some whispering prayers, some unable to speak. Daniels carried her carefully toward the patrol car. "Call medical," he ordered quickly. "She needs help right away." The other officers hurried to radio for an ambulance. The girl's lips moved again, whispering faint words. This time Daniels caught them. "Bad man. Put me here." His jaw tightened, but he kept his voice gentle. "You're safe now. We'll take care of you." As the ambulance lights approached from down the road, the crowd finally released the breath they had been holding. Some wiped tears from their eyes. A young boy looked at Rex with admiration and whispered, "He's a hero." Rex, standing proud beside the patrol car, looked back at the boy with calm eyes, as if he already knew. The moment the trunk opened and the little girl was pulled out, the whole neighborhood changed. The once curious crowd now stood frozen, their eyes wide with disbelief. Some whispered prayers, others gasped, and a few even covered their faces with trembling hands. It was as if time had stopped, and only the sound of the girl's shallow breathing and the distant siren of an approaching ambulance filled the air. Officer Daniels held her close, his arms careful around her small frame. She was light as a feather, and he could feel the weakness in her body. She trembled against him, her little hands clutching his uniform as though holding on to the last piece of safety she had left. Daniels lowered his voice, speaking in a calm and steady tone. "You're all right now. You're safe. No one will hurt you anymore." His words were soft, like a father speaking to a child after a nightmare. Rex stood beside them, no longer barking but watching intently. His body was calm now, his tail giving slow, reassuring wags. The dog seemed to understand the seriousness of the moment. He nudged the officer's leg gently. then leaned forward to sniff the girl's hand. The girl blinked and managed a weak smile through her exhaustion, her tiny fingers brushing against Rex's fur. That small touch said everything: trust, relief, and gratitude. The other officers quickly moved into action. They cleared space, keeping the neighbors at a distance, though some tried to step closer, wanting to see if the child was really alive. "Please stand back," one officer instructed firmly. "We need room for the ambulance." The flashing red and blue lights grew brighter as the ambulance turned the corner, racing down the street. The siren's cry grew louder until it finally stopped in front of the scene. Paramedics rushed out with a stretcher and medical bags, their faces already tight with urgency. Daniels carefully handed the girl to one of them, who checked her pulse, her breathing, and her general state. "She's dehydrated," one paramedic said quickly, "and she hasn't eaten in a while. Let's get her on fluids." The girl whimpered softly as they placed her on the stretcher, but Daniels leaned down and whispered, "They're here to help you, sweetheart. You're strong. You're going to be okay." His voice gave her enough courage to stay still while they secured her. Rex whined, his eyes following the stretcher as it was loaded into the ambulance. He looked at Daniels as if asking, "Can I follow?" Daniels gave him a gentle pat. "You did your job, boy. You saved her. Let them take care of her now." The neighbors started clapping softly, not in celebration but in admiration and relief. Some called out, "God bless her," while others said, "That dog is amazing." The crowd that had once been curious now turned emotional, realizing they had all just witnessed a life being saved. One elderly man, tears glistening in his eyes, stepped forward. "That dog," he said, his voice shaking. "That dog is a gift. Don't ever doubt it." Daniels nodded silently, feeling the truth of those words. The ambulance doors closed, and within moments it pulled away with the little girl inside, lights flashing again. The sound of the siren faded as it carried her to safety. But the job was far from over. Daniels and his fellow officers knew this was not the end of the story. If the child had been left in that trunk, then someone had put her there. Someone dangerous was still out there. Daniel stood near the abandoned car again, his eyes narrowing as he studied it. The dust, the missing plates, the way it was parked, it had not been left there by accident. Whoever abandoned it had tried to make sure it blended into the background. He turned to one of the officers. "We need to tow this vehicle immediately. Forensics should go over it top to bottom. Fingerprints, DNA, everything." The officer nodded, already calling for the tow truck. Another officer was taking photographs from every angle, making sure no detail was missed. They opened the other doors now, checking for evidence inside. Old bottles, crumbs, scraps of paper, anything could be a clue. Daniels knew the smallest detail could lead them to the person responsible. Rex paced around the car once more, sniffing carefully. He barked softly at the driver's seat, and Daniels took note. "We'll need swabs there too," he said to the forensic team. "Rex is picking up something." The neighbors were still gathered, though quieter now, many of them hugging their children. Some were crying softly, thinking about how that little girl could have been anyone's child. A woman stepped forward, her hands clasped. "Officer," she said nervously, "I saw a man near this car a few nights ago. I thought he was just parking and leaving, but now I wonder." Daniels turned to her quickly. "Can you describe him?" She nodded, biting her lip. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket. He didn't stay long. Parked the car, then walked fast down the street toward the old store. Daniels wrote down the details, grateful for the lead. "Thank you, ma'am. This could help." Another neighbor spoke up. "I have a security camera facing the street. Maybe it caught something." Daniel's heart lifted slightly. "Please make a copy of the footage for us. This could be important." The investigation was already growing, spreading from the abandoned car to the entire neighborhood. Daniels knew the community would help. People were shaken, but they wanted answers. And they wanted justice for the little girl. As the tow truck arrived and began lifting the abandoned car, Rex barked again, as if to remind everyone of his role. Daniels knelt down and scratched behind his ears. "Good boy. None of us would have found her without you." The crowd seemed to agree. A child from the neighborhood stepped forward shyly, holding a drawing pad. On it was a quick sketch of a dog drawn with crayons. "This is for Rex," the boy said, his voice small but proud. Daniel smiled warmly, taking the picture and showing it to Rex. The dog sniffed it curiously, then licked the boy's hand. The crowd chuckled softly, easing some of the tension. But as Daniels looked back at the empty street where the car had been, his mind was already racing. The child had whispered, "Bad man." That meant she knew who had done this, at least in part. And if this man had hidden her in a trunk, he might try again with someone else. The night grew cooler as the crowd slowly returned to their homes, though many left their lights on, unable to shake the unease. The police vehicles remained, officers still gathering evidence, their cameras flashing in the dark. Daniel stood tall beside Rex, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. He thought of the little girl, now on her way to the hospital, and he promised himself silently that he would not stop until they found the person who had done this. Rex pressed against his leg, steady and loyal. Daniels looked down at him and nodded. "We're not finished, buddy. We've only just started." The night that had begun with a simple call about an abandoned car had now turned into the beginning of a much larger mystery, and it was clear that this mystery would not be solved easily. But one thing was certain. The truth was out there, and Rex had already led them to it once. He would do it again. The little girl was safe in the hospital, but the mystery of who had placed her in that trunk weighed heavily on everyone's mind. The following day, the story had already spread beyond the quiet neighborhood. News vans parked along the streets. Reporters stood with microphones and cameras flashed as they tried to capture every detail. People shook their heads, repeating the same words again and again. How could someone do this? Officer Daniels arrived at the hospital early in the morning, Rex walking proudly by his side. He wanted to see how the girl was doing and hear what she could share. As he entered the children's ward, nurses greeted him kindly, recognizing both him and Rex. The little girl was resting in a bed, hooked up to fluids, her small body wrapped in a hospital blanket. She looked fragile but calmer than the night before. A nurse whispered, "She's stable now. Still weak, but she's speaking a little more." Daniels nodded, his heart softening as he stepped closer. Rex's nails clicked softly against the hospital floor as he padded forward, his ears tilting when he saw her. The girl opened her eyes slowly, and when she saw Rex, she managed a faint smile. Her lips trembled, but she reached out her hand. Rex carefully lowered his head onto the bed, allowing her small fingers to brush his fur. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice soft and shaky. Daniel swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. He sat on the chair beside her bed and spoke gently. "You're very brave. But can you tell me who did this? Do you remember anything about him?" The girl nodded weakly. "He was tall. He wore a jacket. He told me to stay quiet." She hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. Daniels leaned closer, his voice steady. "It's okay. You don't have to be afraid anymore. We'll find him. You're safe now." With effort, she whispered again. "He brought me to the car at night. He said..." "No one would hear me." Her voice cracked, and the nurse gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Daniels didn't push her further. He knew she needed rest, but he had enough to continue. A tall man with a jacket moving at night. Leaving the hospital, Daniels went straight to the station. Rex trotted beside him, his eyes alert as if he too sensed that the case was far from over. At the station, the evidence team was already at work. The abandoned car had been carefully examined. Fingerprints were lifted, fibers collected, and the interior dusted. The officers were hopeful that something inside would give them a name. One officer reported, "We found a partial fingerprint on the trunk latch. Could be useful." Another added, "There was also a receipt tucked between the seats. It's faded, but it looks like it's from a gas station 2 towns away." Daniel's eyes lit up. "That's something. Let's get the footage from that gas station. Maybe he stopped there." Meanwhile, the neighbor who had offered security camera footage brought in a copy. The video was blurry, but it showed a shadowy figure stepping out of the abandoned car late at night. He wore a dark jacket and a cap pulled low, but his tall frame was clear. He walked quickly, looking around before vanishing into the shadows. The pieces were slowly coming together. Daniels felt the familiar mix of determination and pressure. Someone had tried to take away a child's future, and it was his job to make sure that man did not succeed again. That evening, Daniels and Rex joined a team of detectives as they drove to the gas station mentioned on the receipt. It was a small, quiet place by the highway. The owner, a kind, middle-aged man, welcomed them inside and checked the surveillance footage. Sure enough, a tall man in a jacket had filled the car's tank 2 nights earlier. He paid in cash, never looking directly at the cameras, but his face turned slightly at one point. The image was grainy, but enough to notice a sharp jawline and a scar along his cheek. Daniels' jaw tightened. "We've got him. Now we just need his name." Back at the station, detectives cross-checked the details against known offenders. Hours passed, files stacked on the table, faces on screens, until one match stood out. A man with a history of suspicious behavior, previously questioned in connection with missing children, though never proven guilty. His name was Robert Kane. Daniels felt a chill. He remembered the name from years ago, when Kane had slipped through the system for lack of evidence. "He won't slip away this time," Daniels muttered. Rex, lying at his feet, lifted his head as though agreeing. The next morning, officers prepared to search Kane's last known address, a rundown house near the edge of town. The neighborhood was quiet, but the house stood out. Windows boarded up, weeds choking the yard, and a mailbox rusting in place. Daniels and Rex stood at the front of the team as they approached cautiously. Rex's body stiffened, his nose twitching. He let out a low growl deep in his throat. Daniels placed a hand on his back. "Easy, boy. Stay sharp." The officers knocked on the door. No answer. They knocked again, louder this time. Still silence. Finally, they forced the door open. Inside, the air was musty, the rooms cluttered with old furniture and trash. The house seemed abandoned, but Rex moved quickly, pulling Daniels toward the back. In one small room, the dog stopped and barked sharply. Daniels shone his flashlight and saw drawings scattered on the floor, childlike scribbles, crumpled papers, and old toys. His stomach twisted. Kane had been here. One of the detectives picked up a piece of paper. "Looks like he's been watching children." "This is sick." Daniels clenched his jaw. "He's hunting. And he's not done." The urgency grew. They searched the house for clues and found an old map with several neighborhoods marked in red circles. It was chilling to realize Kane might have been planning more. Back at the station, Daniels reported everything to his captain. "He's dangerous and he's moving fast. We need to track him down before anyone else is hurt." The captain agreed and put every available unit on the case. Alerts went out to nearby towns. Kane's face, the blurry image from the gas station, was shared with patrols everywhere. That night, Daniel sat in his car with Rex by his side, watching over a local park marked on the map. Families often brought their children there, and Daniel's gut told him Kane might return to the same places he had marked. The hours stretched long, the park growing quiet as darkness settled. Daniels kept his eyes sharp, his hand resting on Rex's leash. Then Rex's ears twitched. The dog lifted his head, sniffing the air, growling softly. Daniels followed his gaze and saw a tall figure moving at the edge of the park, keeping close to the shadows. His jacket flapped slightly in the wind, and his steps were quick, almost secretive. Daniel's heart pounded. It had to be Kane. He reached for his radio, whispering, "Suspect spotted." Moving near the west side of the park, requesting backup. Rex was already standing, his body tense, ready to act. Daniels whispered, "Steady, boy. Just a little longer." The figure stopped suddenly, looking around as if sensing he was not alone. Then he turned and began walking away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the trees. Daniels gritted his teeth. The hunt had begun, and it was clear that Rex would once again be the one to lead them straight to the truth. The night at the park felt colder than usual. Officer Daniels sat quietly in his patrol car, Rex by his side, both of them alert. The shadows stretched across the grass and the streetlights flickered faintly. Families had gone home hours earlier, leaving the park silent except for the rustling of leaves. Daniels kept his eyes on the spot where he had last seen the tall figure. He knew deep down it had been Robert Kane, the man who had abandoned the little girl in the trunk. Backup units were on their way, but Daniels understood they had to be patient. Chasing Kane too soon could scare him off, and he might disappear again. Rex sat tall, his ears perked, his eyes scanning the darkness as if he too knew their target was close. The dog gave a soft growl every few minutes, signaling that he could still smell Kane somewhere nearby. Then, movement flickered at the far end of the park. Daniels adjusted his binoculars and caught a glimpse of the man. Kane was walking quickly, glancing over his shoulder, his dark jacket blending into the night. Daniels whispered into his radio, "Suspect in sight, west side. Moving toward the playground." Within minutes, other officers arrived quietly, spreading out to surround the area. Daniels opened his door carefully, Rex leaping down beside him. They moved silently, staying in the shadows, every step filled with tension. Kane reached the empty playground and stopped. He stood near the swings, looking around nervously as though waiting for someone. The sight made Daniel's stomach tighten. Why would a grown man come to an empty playground at night? It only confirmed his fears that Kane had darker plans. Daniel signaled the team with a hand gesture. They were ready to move. But before they stepped forward, Rex suddenly let out a sharp bark. The sound cut through the silence like a blade. Kane spun around, his eyes wide, and for a split second his face was visible in the faint light. The scar on his cheek matched perfectly with the gas station footage. "It's him," Daniel said firmly. Kane bolted. He ran fast, cutting across the playground and into the trees. Daniel shouted, "Go, Rex!" The German Shepherd launched forward, his powerful legs carrying him across the grass. Daniels and the other officers followed, their flashlights slicing through the dark. The chase was fierce. Kane dodged branches and leapt over bushes, but Rex was faster. The dog barked loudly, his voice echoing through the night, guiding the officers closer. Daniel's heart pounded as he ran, determined not to lose the man who had caused so much harm. Kane reached a fence at the edge of the park and tried to climb, but Rex caught up. With one powerful leap, the dog grabbed hold of Kane's sleeve, pulling him down. Kane struggled, shouting and kicking, but Rex held firm, his training perfect. By the time Daniels arrived, 2 other officers had already pinned Kane to the ground. "Got him," one officer yelled. They quickly cuffed Kane's wrists while Rex released his grip and stood back, barking victoriously. Daniels bent down, breathing heavily, and looked directly at Kane. "It's over," he said coldly. "You won't hurt anyone else." Kane glared back but said nothing. His silence was heavy, but his eyes betrayed fear. He was no longer the shadow slipping through towns. He was caught. The officers pulled him to his feet and escorted him to the patrol car. Neighbors who had come outside after hearing the noise watched from a distance, some clapping softly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Word spread quickly that the man who had left the little girl in the trunk had been captured. At the station, Kane was questioned for hours. At first he refused to speak, sitting in silence, his eyes fixed on the table. But with the evidence, the fingerprints, the receipt, the security footage, he could not deny the truth. Slowly, pieces of his crimes came to light. He had been targeting children, watching neighborhoods, and planning. The thought made everyone shudder. But the most important fact was clear. The little girl had been his latest victim, and thanks to Rex, she had been saved. The next morning, the story was everywhere. News channels called it the miracle of the police dog. Headlines showed pictures of Rex beside Daniels, both standing tall and proud. Reporters praised the dog's instincts and the officer's quick action. Across town, people talked of nothing else. At the hospital, the little girl began to smile again. She asked the nurse if she could see Rex. Arrangements were made, and soon Daniels and Rex walked into her room. Her face lit up as soon as she saw them. She reached out, and Rex carefully placed his paw on the edge of her bed. The girl giggled softly, a sound that melted everyone's heart. "You saved me," she said again, hugging Rex's neck. The dog wagged his tail and leaned into her touch as if he understood every word. Daniels watched with a lump in his throat, grateful that the child was safe and alive. Later that week, the town organized a small ceremony to honor Rex. Children held handmade signs that read, "Thank you, Rex, and our hero." The mayor stood on the stage, praising both the officer and his dog for their bravery. But it was Rex who stole the show. Wearing a shiny medal on his collar, he stood tall as the crowd clapped and cheered. The little girl, now stronger, was brought to the front. She hugged Rex tightly, smiling brighter than anyone had seen before. Daniels felt pride swell in his chest. He knew Rex was special, but this moment showed the entire community how powerful one dog's instincts could be. He thought back to that first bark by the trunk, the moment that started it all. If not for Rex's refusal to give up, the girl might never have been found. As the crowd celebrated, Daniels crouched beside Rex and whispered, "You did it, buddy. You gave her life back. You gave hope to everyone here." Rex licked his hand, his eyes shining. The ceremony ended with a standing ovation, but the memory of what had happened would never fade. The town would always remember the night a loyal police dog refused to stop barking. The night officers chose to listen, and the night a child's life was saved. For Daniels, it was a reminder of why he wore the badge. For the little girl, it was the beginning of a new chance at life. And for Rex, it was proof that sometimes heroes don't need words, they just need courage, loyalty, and a bark that refuses to be ignored. As the sun set that evening, Daniels and Rex walked quietly down the street side by side. People waved at them, children ran to pet Rex, and neighbors thanked Daniels for his service. But the officer knew deep down that all the glory belonged to his partner. Rex looked up at Daniels with steady eyes as if to say, "We did it together." And indeed, they had.